Welcome to another lesson on Patton Cloud support for call reporting. Patton devices are now able to send call detail records to the cloud. The cloud evaluates the calls and their quality in real time and shows call information in the cloud user interface. In this lesson, we will go a little bit deeper and learn about the advanced features that are a part of call reporting. First up, let's talk about all the different elements that you can see in the call history view and also in the call detail view. And then later we will focus on how you can filter the call view, how you can restrict the time range, or search for a certain number, or a call state, or media quality. So let's start by having a more detailed look at this call list. On the very left, you see the date and time column. For each day, we list all the calls here, and for the first call of a certain day, we print the date. And for the subsequent calls for that day, we print the time of the call. Now, if you still want to know the time of the first call each day, then you can hover over that first call, and it will show you the time there as well. The second column shows you on which smart node this call has been recorded. The next two columns are the calling party number and the called party number. Note, however, that there are some special calls. Like, for example, in this area here, these three calls. This is actually a call transfer, so you'll have to read it as follows. We have the first call from 100 to 200, and then it looks like this call was put on hold, and then the user with the number 100 made a second call to the user 300. Then those calls were transferred to this third call, where user 100 is now the initiator of the transfer call between the users 300 and 200. So user 100, who appears shaded here with this handoff symbol, is not an active participant of this third call, but is only the initiator. Similarly, here we have a conference call where again 100 calls 200 and then 300 and then initiates a conference call this time, where user 100 is actually a participant of the three-way conference. So for those calls where you have multiple parties, the from column is actually the initiator of that conference or transfer call, and the to column are the participants of that call. The next column is the duration of the call. And with duration, we mean the time where the two or multiple parties could talk to each other. It does not include the call setup time and the call disconnect time. This is also why calls that are aborted by the user or are not answered by the called party don't have any duration value. The next column is the status of the call. It tells us whether the call was successful or failed, was aborted, unanswered, transferred, and so on. Let's look and see how each of those is defined by visiting the user guide by clicking on our Help icon here. Help is always available right here throughout Patton Cloud. Okay, so here all the call statuses are described in more detail. So the call status is active if the call is still in progress. The call is aborted if the calling party hung up before the called party could be notified of the call. For example, if overlap dialing is enabled and the user presses a few digits but then hangs up the phone before all the digits could be collected, then the call is considered aborted by the user. The call is successful if the call could be placed to the called party and both parties could talk to each other and the call was terminated at the end by either side. The call status is transferred if the call was successful but was a kind of consultation call that led to the next call, that is, the transferred call. And the call is unanswered if the called party didn't pick up the phone. In other words, it just continued ringing until the calling party terminated the call by himself. The call is busy. This is a kind of special case of unanswered, where the system of the called party returns a busy indication. That is, the called party is already a participant of another call. Note, however, that there are some phones like SIP phones or ISDN phones where a second call can be placed to a party that is already engaged in a call. The called party is then alerted within that call, and in this case, the CDR is not marked as busy. But if the user doesn't pick up the phone, then it will be unanswered. And finally, a call is considered failed if the call couldn't be routed either by the Patton device itself or by the phone system. But the call is also failed if the two parties talk to each other, but the call is aborted with some condition that indicates that there was a network problem. Note that if the call quality is bad, this does not affect the call status. For the call quality, we have this media quality column here, where the call is classified either as good, fair, or poor. We cover the meaning of these classifications in the settings video. Please have a look at that lesson to learn more about that. Let's look a little bit more at those conference and transfer calls. Take this transferred call here. Let's click on it. As you can see on top, we don't have the from party on the left-hand side and the to party on the right-hand side. We have instead the initiator of the transfer on the left-hand side. We see here that it's a transferred call, and we have the two participants of the transferred call on the right-hand side. You can see that this transferred call was actually the result of previous calls. If you click on this previous call item here, then you can jump to those two previous calls. So this is the call from 100 to 200, a regular call which was transferred and resulted in this transfer call. You can click on this to go back to the transferred call. Now if you go back to the list of calls and you go to the conference call, it has a similar layout. We have the initiator on the left-hand side and the three participants on the right-hand side. And again, we can go back to the consulting calls and we see that this call was transferred into conference, and we can go back to the conference call here. All right, now let's look a little bit more into how we can filter this call list here. The first thing we would like to show you is how you can specify the time range that displays here. By default, we are in live view, which means that if you place a call, it will be automatically streamed at the bottom of this list. But you can also go back in time by clicking on this drop down here, which opens the Date Ranges panel. Down here under Custom Range, you can specify a date range by clicking on these calendar icons and then selecting the range of dates you would like to see calls for. Or you can use our quick ranges to see a preset range, like the calls of today, or yesterday, or the previous month, and so forth. Now these quick ranges set the from and to boxes in the custom range section. Let's take a moment to talk about how this expression has to be read. So, to get the previous month's call list, we basically say that we want the current time minus 1 month, which mathematically lands us somewhere in the middle of the previous month. And so we then divide this, so to speak, by the month, and that tells the system to go to the beginning of the month. So that's the from day, set to the beginning of the previous month. The to date is the same expression, but for it means from now, go back 1 month, which again mathematically causes us to end up in the middle of the previous month, and then here our divided by month switch means go to the end of the month. So together these two expressions are actually from the beginning of the previous month to the end of the previous month. We can use these arrows here to go back even 1 month more, to go before the previous month. And now we see that the custom range has changed accordingly. So this is now going back 2 months with a range of from the beginning of that month to the end of that month. So these dividers here are how you can specify to go to the beginning or to the end of a certain time. Let's see another example by looking at a time frame like your last 3 hours. So the last 3 hours are just now, minus 3 hours, until now, obviously. To see calls for the last day, as in yesterday, well, that's now minus 1 day, which might be in the middle of yesterday, right? And then set the divide by day switch to go from the beginning of yesterday until the end of yesterday. Like that. You can have your own expression here. Let's say it is Wednesday. So if we want the calls of last Wednesday, we go back 1 week, divide by day to go back to the beginning of the day for Wednesday last week. And for the to date, again, subtracting 1 week would send us to the middle of last Wednesday, so we divide by day to go all the way to the end of that day. So these expressions are quite dynamic and useful. And when you use these expressions, they go to the URL of the page you're looking at in the browser, and it's actually stored temporarily in the browser. Since it is a dynamic expression, that means if you use your browser history to go back to that page at a later time, the same expression is valid, the formula works, but now this may mean something else, right? A couple of days may have passed. Use it the next day, which is Thursday in the example we just used, and this is now Thursday a week ago. So keep in mind, these are relative expressions that are always relative to the current date and time. Okay, let's see what else we can do. Let's select this year, which is a lot of calls actually. And so what we want to do in this case is restrict or filter the number of calls that we see here on the page. Here we can enter a subscriber number. Let's see what are the calls that the user with phone number 700 was placing or received. This is actually quite useful if your support team has a call from a customer that complains about something like bad voice quality. So you can enter the subscriber number of that customer and filter the list down to just his or her calls, and identify the calls they are talking about, and then look at what is going on with those calls. Now, when you enter the subscriber number here, the call list is changed a little bit. We don't have separate from or to columns anymore, but just one column with the from or to number, together with a type column, which shows whether this was an incoming call or outgoing call with respect to that subscriber number. You can think of this list like a call history that could be pulled up for just that subscriber's phone number. Just click on this X symbol here to clear the filter and go back to see all the phone numbers again. We also have a More button here that you can use to add more filters to the list. We have a protocol drop-down here. You can specify that you only want to see calls that were involving an FXS phone. You can select calls with a certain status. Show me all the calls that were busy, for example. Or you can filter on the media quality to show only the poor calls. And of course you can combine things, so I can see all the good calls that were involving SIP in some way. On the right-hand side, you can specify how many calls you want to see on one page. Let's remove these selectors to see more calls. By default, the size of the list will automatically adapt to your window size. But you can also specify that you want to see more calls on one page if you prefer a view where you can scroll around. And now there's one final thing that we would like to show you, and this is on the call detail page. So let's go to a call and look at the media quality of a call leg. Sometimes this can be a very long call. Perhaps it is important that you focus on certain parts of that call. You can see below here on the time axis that there are some sliders. You can move these around to limit the visible part of the call, and then slide around to the part of the call you'd like to get a better look at. Pretty cool, huh? You also see here on the slider the envelope of the Moss score to help you zero in on the portion you want to see. Also, the other graphs on the page will adapt according to your selection in one of the graphs. All right, this has been a tour of the more advanced features of call reporting. Please watch our other call reporting lessons to learn more about this feature. They include an overview lesson, a lesson on call-based alerts, and a lesson on settings. And that concludes this Patton Academy lesson on advanced call reporting. Thanks for watching.